The reason I'm here is that I've been asked to share some of my experiences with using qualitative research to meet some pretty challenging business objectives we were given a couple of years ago to bring a range of different mobile services to market, and I would judge quite successfully. My role, I work within Vodafone Group in London, and I work not in the telecoms part of Vodafone, but in commercial services. Essentially, the division that's responsible for bringing together products and services for the internet, essentially apps, is what we have to provide. And I work in consumer insights, but within the innovation team, essentially, helping to bring these products and services at the concept stage, and then even more importantly, making sure they're ready for launch. Now, I should probably give you a bit more background on my career, because it does have some impact upon the learnings and observations I'm sharing today in the presentation. I'm a bit of a rarity in Vodafone Group in that, while the last 4 years I've spent working in technology, my previous 12 is actually working in FMCG. I have been working in local and group roles for Kraft and Diageo. And in that time, the hallmark of my experience there was that insights were at the very hub. You typically had a very integrated insights function that was the center of each one of the brands. And the brands were treated holistically, and the consumer understanding was treated holistically. The functions around the brand would interact with each other very strongly, very tightly. And so there would be this very common understanding of the consumer and the brand development. So from innovation to communication to pricing, you'd have a very strong integrated view of how to develop the brand further. That did have a significant contrast, a bit of a culture shock when we moved to Vodafone 4 years ago, in which it's a much more decentralized company and a much more specialized sets of teams that we're working on products and brands. And I will speak to that a little bit more about how that affects some of the learnings we gathered. But Thomas?
Yeah, I think there's one final learning about Tom. Maybe he's too modest to share with us that he's really a problem solver, and he believes in the power of being empathy. And I'm trying to move the slides.
Yeah.
That's a challenge.
So I guess I would say, if there's a through line.
So basically, no worries. Problem solver, empathy. And that's actually where, of course, people come in. And we're great. And okay, that's actually where people come in, and understanding people is basically a passion I share with everyone in this room, which is great to have you all gathered. I'm Thomas Troch, as already mentioned. I'm part of the innovation lab at InSites Consulting, where we continuously develop, fine-tune, and test methodologies. I actually have just like Tom, FMCG background. I also have a strange background. I have a background in product and service design. So I focus on the role of consumers in innovation. Basically with the key goal of merging research with creativity and merging creativity with research. So talking about products, talking about successful products, what makes a product successful? How to create a successful product? Well, I think what all successful products basically have in common is that they are created at the intersection of where the objectives of people, of business, of technology meet, fueled with creativity. This is true for all products, and definitely also for products in digital media, like smartphone applications, the type of products we like to talk about with you today. What is specific about the development of these digital media products is that you can change them in time. You actually have an opportunity to adapt, to fine-tune, and to update your product after the launch. And although this is truly a strength of this type of products, it's also a threat, because you actually risk the fact that you over-appreciate the power of simplicity, the power of speed. So the topic we like to talk about in this final presentation, and thanks for sticking around until the very end, is actually how we can bring this sense of quality into a world where speed, where simplicity rule, how we can bring qualitative research in this process and prove also the impact of research.
Just to reiterate one part, that I as well want to impart with you two key things. One is how can you stimulate some thinking on how you can optimize qualitative research to optimize the quality as well as speed and simplicity in new product development. And in new product development teams, speed and simplicity is the mantra that's spoken over and over again, almost eclipsing the dimension of quality. And even though it's considered to be inherent in the process, sometimes this overlooking of the understanding of what quality means from a consumer perspective has implications. And the second thing is that from a client perspective, I also want to stimulate some thinking about what qualitative researchers can do and insight people can do to also help manage stakeholders better in order to make sure that the objectives, the research objectives are met, but also beyond that, the business objectives are met, that the learnings are actually gaining traction and implemented in market successfully. First, I should give you a little bit more indication about what kind of apps and services I've been working on. Now, some apps and innovation you might consider to be new to the world, and some actually not, or you've seen something similar to it. One such product is Cloud. It's a backup service for anything that's on your mobile phone. So photos, files, music. And it automatically backs up to the cloud and stores it there for you. It can also be accessible to any device that's attached to the internet. As I've mentioned, not every product is truly new to the world in order to be considered innovative. For our consumer, our mainstream consumer, that we define by being made up of a few different global segments we consider relevant, for them, this product is actually hugely innovative. It addresses a need that they currently have that they haven't even anticipated yet. For them, this consumer group are open to the advantages of technology, but they don't want to do any work to actually find it. They're open to the benefits of technology, but they don't want to go through any of the learning curve to actually be able to use it. And in particular, for content that is considered personal, they need a stamp of approval that, in fact, is going to be treated with care. And in this case, Vodafone offering a service like this that they may have seen around other places, they actually end up being the sole provider that could really bring this to them seamlessly, efficiently, but also with a trust. Now, one of the things I want to make mention about this as one of our typical services that may not be considered entirely innovative is that on one hand, on the other hand, is that this mainstream consumer requires simplicity and ease, and there's a lot of work that has to go on behind the scenes to make this experience truly effortless. And as a result, it does have implications for how our teams are working on our products and the implications to how the research is done as well. Our products are highly complicated. Beyond the surface, there's lots going under the skin, from having to make decisions on aesthetics versus ensuring that content is delivered in an amount of detail and done efficiently. The tasks are operated within seconds. People have no interest in waiting more than, we found, 2 to 3 seconds for a task to be completed. There are things from managing the app across digital environments, moving from Wi-Fi to 3G across different roaming centers. And even understanding the value proposition for this service. What would people pay for? Why would they even care about it when they have to concern themselves about the complexities of payment offerings, from bundles, pay-as-you-go, contract, what costs money and what doesn't? They're really unsure as to what they're paying for and what is covered within their packages. So when we come up with them with a new product, they don't really easily know whether or not something's going to take any money, more money from their pocket. And as a result, to sort of solve these problems, we have dedicated teams who are specialists who work independently to solve all these challenges. And with the mantra of speed and efficiency and simplicity, they think the best way to do it is to work highly independently, most often in silos, to make sure that all the questions are asked, all the specific questions are ticked off as quickly as possible for us to get to market. Now, as a result, there is also independent research that is performed by each of the different each of the different teams. And it's not ruled by one overarching insight group, as I mentioned, is the norm within FMCG teams. Here, they're all looking at the consumer in general from the same starting point, but all their specific questions, how they go about looking into the needs of the consumer, are very focused on very specific questions. Now, what they do in the course of the challenges that they're facing, they're having to get ready from user experience design, technology team, the product team worrying about how to get this to market in the most relevant way, positioning it correctly, the terminals team, the people who worry about getting these the apps and services on the devices across different operating systems. They're all working independently, and they all have check boxes that they have to go through, including having to do the right kind of research to answer the questions. But by the end of this process, everyone feels that they've completed their task correctly, but there are some significant unanswered questions left. And one thing that Barry mentioned yesterday from the Dell presentation is that when different teams are working on independent pieces of research, what can happen is you can miss out on some very obvious, huge, crucial issues that can affect the success of your product in market. And believe it or not, we can actually get to market without having done any further stages of research. And that has been something that's been having to be challenged. 2 years ago, we had a stop and think as a group function, because we had a series of successes and failures, some much more prominent than others. And we came together and said, listen, there's a big challenge we have to face. We have to catch up in the data market. We want to launch 10 new internet services over the course of a year, approximately. In order to do that, we want to make sure that these products are successful to driving loyalty in market, and we have to make sure that as many of our local markets buy into it as possible. Now, up to now, the process had been throw things at the wall, get them out. Things were generally lower profile. But with this mandate, higher risk investment was put on the table, higher profile launch programs with actual dates, and a challenge to actually make a difference in our bottom line. The implications, unfortunately, well, fortunately and unfortunately, one, we had to change the status quo of how we did things. We just don't know how exactly, but from new product development to insight. But what really made it sure that we had to do something differently was the fact that while Group is mandated to develop these products to be adopted by our global markets, Vodafone, perhaps uniquely, but not too unusual, is highly decentralized. Each one of these markets can refuse to take any one of our products. And even if they take the products, they don't have to support them. And even if they support them, they can actually change the name. They can do anything they want to it, so we can lose complete consistency. So we were faced with a number of different challenges, both on a business level as well as on a practical level. How are we going to get these things to market, and how do we do them successfully? And ultimately, we've realized that we had two different customers now in Group. Not just our consumers we had to prove our products with, but we also had to prove our products to the local market so they actually would buy into them, support them, and ensure that they would have a chance for success.
Okay, thank you, Tom. So in this highly decentralized reality, we needed to challenge the status quo, and it actually became even more important to take the customer as a central stage in innovation, to get all these noses from these different teams, from these local markets in the same direction. So the ultimate goal of developing such a service, or we can ask ourselves the question, when is such a service successful? And it is successful when it succeeds in building a loyal customer base. So in order to drive loyalty, which is the goal of these different services, it needs to meet and surpass the expectations of customers. And for me, as a researcher, the expectations of customers is something really, really interesting, because they change over time. They are not static, they are dynamic. So as Marshall McLuhan nicely summarizes, we shape our tools, and afterwards our tools shape us. So actually, by using a product, I can potentially change my behavior. Something, a feature, a need that was peripheral before can become mainstream before we even know it. So that's a really interesting dynamic situation where we cannot solve it or answer it with just doing research at this one moment in time. So really interesting. What is even more specific about developments in the digital media atmosphere, when we see that expectations are changing, they're actually changing at the same speed that new applications are being used and adopted. So at a lightning fast speed, customers are changing their expectations, requiring a totally different approach in qualitative research and in integrating these users in the development process. Because it's already the last part of the conference, I made a very oversimplification of the process of involving customers in such a process. So basically, and that's an easy one, we start with a problem definition. That's, of course, one of the most important things, which is kicking off with a key insight. So to give you an example, one of the services started with a key idea, actually based on an emotion, on a sense of fear, that parents want to protect their children from all the harms and danger that come with internet, with mobile. So basically, from this thought, from this idea, the team at Vodafone could start by ideating, conceptualizing, and actually developing a prototype, a well-working prototype, as fast as possible. And then the next challenge becomes, in this approach, to get the prototype out of the lab as fast as possible. Because the only way you can understand the experience is to actually allow users to experience it, to adopt it in their life, and to use it over time, which is the third and final step, really throwing it into their lives and adopting it for a longer period of time. To give you an example, building forward on the insight from fear, this is Guardian, which is a service that is being tested in this way, in this final phase, in different elements, from the visual aesthetic to UX to the performance of the application. What we discovered also by having, and we'll introduce the methodology shortly, by having a different way of allowing customers to interact in this final phase, that we can detect also a deeper insight, which is the key to the go-to-market, which is the key to the positioning. So in this case, it wasn't communicated as starting from a sense of fear, but actually starting from a good thing. So giving parents a tool to actually teach their children to responsibly interact with the internet, with the digital media on their mobile phone. So basically it's like a driver's permit with different stages and different steps, building up experience with the internet and also building up responsibility.
So yes, this stage of prototyping and getting a functioning product to market, this is really the moment of truth for us, and it's truly the most important stage. I referred to earlier, sometimes apps get to this stage, and because of all the independent work that's been done on it, they think it's sufficient to go to market, and they're willing to let it live and die based upon its performance with consumers and how well it's supported. But what we were recognizing, and particularly for these particularly irrelevant strategic services we were working on, that there were some questions that remained unanswered for us, confidence we hadn't built up yet. That for new-to-the-world services for our mainstream consumer, things they hadn't a reference point for, we couldn't rely upon the independent pieces of work that have been done to date. We need to understand, with all these work streams coming together, creating one integrated product, how well did it actually meet the promise we had set out for ourselves at the very beginning? Individually, they may be satisfying the needs of and holistically, are we actually truly creating a product that people will adopt? So for us, we needed to understand how well this product would perform across every possible situation the consumer would find themselves in their real life. We had to make sure that it was solving real problems that they were facing, and they were doing better than any other behavior or any other solution out there for them. And most important of all, actually, was trying to understand what is it that we didn't know. That is the key question that has bit us in the butt many, many times. Thinking that we knew enough. We have very smart people, highly engaged in the category. They are willing to make a lot of assumptions. What we've realized from some failures that we've learned from, we need to know things that we don't know. So what is clear to us that an approach we had to choose, a qualitative approach that would best meet our needs to help bring our products and make sure they're ready for market, had to provide us some holistic understanding of the consumer, that we could understand the role of these apps in their lives in the most relevant way. We had to understand real life, and it had to be over time, because we also recognize that with new products, new things, it takes time for people to become familiar with them. And I mentioned the mainstream consumer, they're not getting in there in the nuts and bolts and working it out themselves. They need time to become familiar, and over time, then they can tell us whether or not it's something they could adopt or not. And we recognize in research it's a hot housing environment, but we wanted to know, is there potential or not, and why not? So this is an example of what we actually chose. User trials, and it's been discussed in different forms over the course of the last couple of days. Our user trials are essentially online communities with 50 to 100 consumers per market, and we often ran these projects simultaneously across several markets. And we generally let them run 3 weeks, because we found that it helped to give the consumers chances to get to know the methodology as well as also our products, and test it out enough in different situations that we would understand the performance of our product. Now, there's some key benefits that we found in using this user trial methodology beyond just being able to test things in real-life circumstances over time. We're able to, because of the robustness of the numbers, we're able to feel comfortable that every possible situation was covered in most different types of lives that exist within our consumer group. The format of the user trial, and you'll see here, it's a very easy to access, very simple rooms in which there'll be daily activities and open-ended feedback for any issues that would come up spontaneously. We were able to track both individual customer journeys, individual issues that would happen across the life cycle from first discovery through to ongoing usage, and whether or not they would actually adopt or reject it. We also got a chance in group discussions to look at topics of conversations that are of relevance, sometimes planted by us, sometimes generated by the consumer, that would help us understand how are they talking about the product, what language are they using, what are the benefits that they see are most relevant. And in the world of where we have to rely so much upon word of mouth to drive success of our products, it was hugely valuable to understand how is our product being perceived, how it would be communicated, versus what we intended going into the project.
How did you recruit them? From your own customers or from some field service?
Actually would range. Now, sometimes we used panels, and sometimes we actually went on the street and found these people.
Depending also on the different markets, for example, in Spain, and also on the Vodafone customer base.
Yeah.
I think most of them were from the customer base.
That's another example of what it was. Now, along with the user trials and exploring them and helping us understand all the different technical performance issues, we also recognized that we had to really push and stress test this methodology to get the most out of it. We had the opportunity over the course of 2 years to do over 12 projects across many different markets. A chance to really take advantage of the benefits, the advantages that exist within online communities that we couldn't use in any other methodology. And there are 3 key axes or attributes of online communities that we pushed as hard as they could, and for us drove really significant change in our thinking, drove richer information, as well as drove faster decision making, because it helped our teams align quicker to the end results and recommendations. So 3 of them, the 3 axes were numbers, the customer profiling we brought in, and the time that we used as part of the project. First off, numbers. I mentioned to you we introduced 50 to 100 consumers. For us, it not only helped reassure us that we're covering off all the bases and all technical issues, but also allowed us to introduce a bit of a quant-like analysis into the qualitative, to provide an extra layer to help support some of the qualitative learnings. It was never to supplant or to take over, but always as a support system. And this was particularly useful for our stakeholders who are data geeks, who are highly entrepreneurial, but they're data hungry. They were thirsty for information, but they're used to numbers and data, zeros and ones. And we realized that we needed to ensure that we could speak their language and that they would adopt the information. So we ended up, beyond the qualitative feedback, also introducing some quant-like information like competitive benchmarking, overall recommendation, always within the caveat that this is a hot housing study and not to take it outside and extrapolate to the market. And then secondly, consumer profiling. We mentioned that recruitment. We didn't bring in just our mainstream consumer, which we could have. In fact, we were pushed that way many times to simplify and lower costs. What we found, though, is that the richest information came from a compare and contrast with our mainstream consumer, whom we had to find a way to deliver our apps and services simply and seamlessly. But we also had to understand what's the benchmark for success. What do the heavily involved digitalized consumers say about our products? How can they help us articulate better what really this service should offer? What is the next evolution of this service? What should it be? As I mentioned before, the paradigm is shifting quite rapidly. Even a mainstream consumer gets used to things over time and has different expectations. We had to know what was going to happen next. That compare and contrast allowed us to really hone in on what is it we need to do differently to reach our mainstream target and how to build ourselves future-proofing for the future. And lastly, there's a side benefit in that our data geeks working with us, our stakeholders, were able to identify with the digitalized and help see that the assumptions they were making needed to be rechecked and understand that there is a difference between the consumer and the digitalized, the mainstream consumer and the digitalized. That they couldn't just say that research was wrong. We showed them that, in fact, there is a different segment that actually makes different decisions.
So indeed, in order to be successful in selecting the methodology, it's not only about the research objectives, it's not only about the participant profile, but in this case also very much about the profile of the stakeholders, the internal stakeholders at the company, to match their needs. And the last but not least axis is time. We follow the natural journey that consumers experience in discovering, in trialing, and in adopting a product. And this is really crucial, because if you just have the moment of, this one moment of just experiencing the product, you miss out on key elements. It's like a service design journey, where you have the pre, the during, and the post. The pre, we want to know in this first stage, what do they think about the product before they even use it? How do they discover it, understand it? How do they evaluate it in order to get to that moment of trialing? But also the last part, after they've used it, what is actually causing for them to come back and to adopt the product and to use it over and over again with this end goal of becoming a loyal customer. So by having this longitudinal approach, getting to the realistic natural situation of going through these different phases as a customer and going through almost all these different moments and context, you're actually able to map this journey. And to give you an example, highlighting emotions, but also and specifically triggers and barriers in these different phases. The first service, Tom introduced cloud. So in the discovery phase, cloud was actually based on first-time smartphone users have the opportunity to take pictures and movies on their mobile device, on multiple devices. So basically, their visual life is cluttered now on different devices. So they want to bring it all together in this new service. So this is really matching their needs in discovery and understanding. It's evoking positive emotions. But then we see that in the evaluation phase, it's like, wait, especially with the digitalized consumers, it can do pictures, it can do movies, which was the starting insight. But what about my PDF? What about my doc files? I actually want this functionality in different elements. So in this case, we were actually able, before the launch of the product, to basically also adapt the features before launch to get a very positive emotionality in the customer journey, to drive adoption and to drive first trial, of course, and then adoption and repeat usage. What is here key to map the journey is that we also select the methodology in a natural way. So if you have a product that is naturally on a smartphone, we also use along this journey, of course, a smartphone application to allow customers, when they give feedback, they share their stories, their experiences, to enrich this feedback with screenshots from the product, which makes sense to do it in the natural context of their own smartphone device. And to give you just one example of how we're getting more than we're asking by engaging participants, personally, I would never ask a participant to create an infographic about his customer journey. I think that's a little bit tricky, a little bit difficult for them to do. And still, by engaging them, you see spontaneously how they are just mapping out their experience throughout the product in a really powerful way. I think a professional designer could not have designed this in a way that was more powerful towards developers, towards the internal team, to bring across this message. So what?
So we did all the user trials. What, in fact, was the impact of these? Did we meet any of our objectives? And so what? Well, while we didn't expect to have to do this, we actually had to sometimes say, no, this wasn't working. And in fact, it actually built us credibility and helped our teams save themselves from not only having a failure of a product, but also affecting our brand equity negatively for Vodafone. And in some cases, we actually had to force them to stop launch, go back to bare bones, and rethink the investment in the product itself. But more importantly, or as importantly, we helped to optimize the services across the board, across every single user trial. We gave them ways in which they could optimize the service. Sometimes the small things had big impact, and particularly a list of small things could make a big difference. Even, for example, language. Things that we thought were automatic, we understood. Language and lexicon had to sometimes be radically changed in order to be understandable for our mainstream consumer, to make them feel more comfortable and clear. Because sometimes they will avoid certain buttons because they will not understand what it may lead them to. They have fears. And until we actually done the user trial, got them working through it hands-on, we sometimes didn't know that there was something they didn't do was actually an active decision to avoid, and language was a key way to get at it. And now, as a result of optimized services, we were able to, in all the cases where our user trials were approved, meet our performance targets for the first year. And that signaled to our senior management, this is a methodology that was worthwhile to embed within our innovation funnel, to make it mandatory for strategic services to go through to get the approval from our methodology. And lastly, but also not least important at all, because without buy-in from our stakeholders and from our local markets, we would not have been able to have any chance of getting our products into market. And with this methodology, it was able to help answer all the key questions that they needed, the confidence they needed in order to support the product. And not just actually say they'll launch it, but actually provide marketing programs, which for us was one of the key indicators that the product was going to have a chance of success. So SMS campaigns and other poster campaigns, as well as being integrated within some of our big new strategic pricing programs, one's called RED at the moment. One thing I want to make mention in particular, that we've discovered one key insight, one key critical factor of success for choosing a methodology. It's not just about ensuring that you have a methodology that can meet your research objectives. You actually have to find a methodology that will get the buy-in from your stakeholders, that meets their needs. Now, it's never at the detriment of the project itself or research, but sometimes you have to know that different people have a different language. And we were able, to, with the online methodology, to push it to the point where it actually helped different eclectic groups in different specialized teams to talk together, to come to some common alignment. And whereas sometimes they would launch services and still be at loggerheads, still be not liking their product because of another team's decisions, this user trial helped to give them confidence that even if they felt they were wrong or they were right, and that something should have been done differently, they can agree to a common understanding as to what we recommended for this product.
And I think we were talking about internal buy-in, the final thing, and we're going to it very quickly just to give it in the world, even in the words of these internal stakeholders. For example, head of communication said that it's one of the most powerful tools to make sure that we connect with consumers. And what I thought was really striking is that it was better, just this interaction on a project level, project after project, that it was better than any training to actually prove and to actually get this customer engagement and get the highlight on the customer focus. And as a very final end of this presentation, we always like to give the final word to a participant, to an actual Vodafone customer. So we have a very short cliplet of someone telling us what he is actually appreciating about this methodology, because the fourth benefit here as an outcome is that it's actually really interesting, crucial to see how you can engage with customers and how customers are so willing to engage with Vodafone.
I think it's a great way of generating some data on how customers think, or consumers think, and really what they want from products. I think it worked really well. I like the incentives, like the different achieving levels, the different bonuses, and the way the moderators were able to refocus the group with clever content and get the best out of our little group. And also, this was a great experience for me. I love experiencing new situations and using my creativity to help improve like products and things. I do that at work all the time. So we've got, for example, some e-learning and making sure that people can relate back to that material, that the visuals actually mean something to them when they're looking at them.
And with these words, the final end of the presentation. Thank you very much.